Hello everyone, this is Kyle Hernandez from kylesdev.com. In the last video, we learned how to create and write JavaScript code inside the JavaScript console. This video is the second of a series that will show you guys how to create JavaScript applications yourself. This video is divided into two parts. The objective of both two parts will be understanding of what JavaScript is, basically the whole information, the whole structure of what JavaScript is. The first part, which you guys are watching right now, we will first understand what the definition of JavaScript is and what JavaScript can be used for. From there, then we'll take a look at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, breaking it definition by definition one by one. After we had a brief overview of what HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is, we'll be using a World Wide Web app, Facebook, to brief explanation of why it's used for, what Facebook is used for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. What is the definition of JavaScript? JavaScript is a text-based programming language used both on the client side and server side that allows you to make web pages interactive. When I say text-based programming language, what I mean is it's basically the language of syntactization. The code looks for grammar and spelling. When I say this, if you look to the bottom left of the screen where the user is typing their code out, you'll see that there is some tags here. Below the div tag right here, there's a form tag, an open and a close form tag. The main key of text-based programming is whenever the user types any information, they always use quotes whenever they after an attribute. Let's say method, as you see right here on the screen. You'll see method, and then you'll see that there's strings here. Remember I said in the last video that when creating if-else statements and messages or alerts, you always got to have strings in them, or else JavaScript will, like I said, it will look for grammar and spelling, but if you don't have good grammar and spelling, which is the quotes right here, JavaScript will error out and you'll need to have the quotes inside the attribute and the ID as shown here. You can see that attribute action has a hashtag and ID has a form value. On key up has draw chart function. Basically what I'm trying to say is the green text is the attribute or what it's calling by, and the inside the quotes like post, the hashtag like I said earlier, these are all IDs which JavaScript needs to call back later on in the code. But another thing is when you're creating variables and you're assigning to some sort of text, number, always have semicolons at the end. Like I said earlier, JavaScript will error out. It will do the same thing when declaring variables. You always need a semicolon at the end, and so forth. When I say client side is running scripts such as JavaScript on a client device, usually within a browser. Usually when people start coding or whenever they code inside of a tool, Visual Studio Code, like this on a screen, they usually run it on some sort of port or browser, like it says here. What I mean when they run it in a port or browser is when the users type or press a button that's called go live. They use a tool inside of VS Code called Live Server. This will trigger the port. Basically what you code inside Visual Studio Code will trigger to the browser. That's basically what I'm saying. Is, for example, whenever you go to a port, let's say 127.0.1/5500, that's an example of a port. We'll be using this to create our JavaScript code. So server side is scripting extended version of JavaScript that enables backend access to databases, file systems, and servers. Servers, meaning us, we write the script. I'm basically summarizing client and server side. They both have a physical connection between one another. So, like I said, they both have APIs and they enable backend to databases. Let's say DynamoDB if you're using Amazon. and whether API we're using Swift for JSON formatter. Now those are examples of server side and client side and server side. Server side, what I just said now, and client side a couple seconds back. So like I said, they use a physical connection bond. Only difference is the browser, which is the port, which is on client side, and web server, which is databases like DynamoDB and such. Now HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I'm going to be using pronouns to briefly explain what these mean one by one to make it a little more sense. HTML is the noun, the subject that the sentence is all about. This means that whenever you want to create some sort of text, like when you first start coding, you always start with HTML. You can create it how big or how small. Like for example, a p tag. A p tag can be small in text. Now, if you're doing an h1 tag or a header 1 tag, that's a big text. That's when we're going to be doing different JavaScript applications in future tutorials. CSS is the adjective, dressing up the noun to make it more attractive. Just like what I was saying about the HTML. HTML can be big or small. Now CSS has our back, because CSS can make the HTML text however, like you can make any color of the background of the text. You can make it red, black, blue, green, whatever. What's cool about CSS is that CSS is basically making it look nicer. HTML is just making it just the text show up. For JavaScript, JavaScript is the verb, the interactions, and animations on a website. Interactions and animations, what I'm trying to say, like when people start writing some JavaScript code, or whenever they've been writing some JavaScript code, they always need some sort of function to trigger data to make the app work. Let's say you're doing rock, paper, scissors, or rock, paper, scissors. We could say that create a function, let's say player moves, or another function computer moves, and then calculate the score. That's why JavaScript is the verb. It calculates the functions and the verbs and everything, the data. CSS is the adjective because to style the HTML text, make it look nicer and more colorful. HTML is the noun because that's when you first start, like I said, but JavaScript is the last one to do. And by the way, JavaScript isn't just for front-end developers, it's also for back-end, which we'll see in the next video. Lastly, before we close this part, we will look at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript behind the scenes. You guys will notice to the left right here, there is some loading data, some server-side data, and you can see that there is some text right here. What is on your mind? This is why I brought you to the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript example. There's a what's on your mind p tag, I would say, because it's kind of small. This Facebook name and text is kind of big and had some styling for CSS. They also had a search bar. For Facebook, it could be a bold text. They also have some buttons, a plus button, a search bar, and a message. That's essentially some HTML. They also have some live, photo, and check-in, and these buttons down here. Now to the right of the screen, you'll see that the data is fully loaded because the data has been triggered with the photos and friends. The thing about JavaScript is that whenever you click something, let's say the search bar or the message, the like, comment, or share button, JavaScript will trigger it by those click functions that we create inside to make the app happen. Whenever you click on it, it will occur. So if you click on see all photos, you'll see all the photos. If you see all friends, you'll see all photos. See all friends. But that's basically it for part 1. In part 2, which is the next video, we'll be learning about the rest of JavaScript, like the front end and back end frameworks that JavaScript has. We will be looking at ECMAScript, also known as ESScript, which is the foundation of JavaScript. And lastly, we'll be understanding the JavaScript tools that we'll be needing to install our app to make our app look nice. But be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye now.